Hello everyone, here is Afra Siab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended, held on October-November 2019, and paper code is 0625 with variant 41. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1. A car accelerates from rest at t is equal to 0 to its maximum speed. Figure 1.1 is the speed time graph for the first 25 seconds of its motion. So here is the figure 1.1 and we can see that it's a speed time graph. The time is taken in second while the speed is measured in meter per second. And the speed is taken along y-axis while the time is taken along x-axis. The mass of car is 2300 kg. For the time between t is equal to 0 and t is equal to 5.0, determine the acceleration of the car. So here we have to find out the acceleration of car between t is equal to 0 to 5 seconds. So going back to the graph, we can see that it's a speed time graph and the curve is shown in this figure. So at this point, starting from 0, we can see that the trend of this curve is that the speed of body is increases and it increases from 0 up to almost 17.5 seconds. Speed increases means that car is accelerating, or we can say that when we increase the time, the speed also increases. So in this section is actually car accelerating, while from 17.5 second to 25 second, it is a constant line that is parallel to time axis. So we can see that this portion is actually for the constant speed. I write here it's a constant speed. And this is for increasing speed. So in the part 1, we have to find out the acceleration from 0 to 5 seconds. So first of all, 0 second is at this point and 5 second is at this point. So we have to find that this point is basically the locus of time and speed values, and this is second point. We know that acceleration is equal to the gradient of speed time graph or the slope of speed time graph. So I write here slope. It is also equal to gradient of speed time graph. And when we write the gradient, acceleration becomes as delta v over delta t. So here we have two times, that is 0 and 5. So I write here v2 minus v1 over t2 minus t1. So acceleration will be equal to change in velocity per unit change in time. So we have to find out the values of velocity corresponding to time t is equal to 0 and t is equal to 5 seconds. So using ruler, I draw a line from this point and it will touches the speed axis. When time t is equal to 5 seconds, the speed is almost 15 meter per second. So first of all, I write here t1 is time which is 0 second. So I write here 0 and v1 is also equal to 0 because initially the speed is 0 when time t is equal to 0. So secondly, when time t2 becomes 5 seconds, its corresponding speed is 15 meter per second. So I write here v2 is equal to 15 meter per second. Now I am going to putting values here. So v2 is 15 minus 0 over 5 minus 0. So that the acceleration comes to be 3.0 meter per second square. The unit of acceleration is meter per second square. So I write here acceleration is equal to 3.0 meter per second square. Part 2. The resultant force acting on the car. Here we have to find out the value of resultant force. So first of all, in the part 1, we are given that the mass of car is 2300 kg and acceleration we already find. So by using Newton's second law of motion, that F is equal to ma. So here m is the mass and a is the acceleration. By putting the values, we can get the resultant force. So that mass is 2300 multiplied by acceleration is 3.0 meter per second square. So the force comes to be 6900 newtons. I write here resultant force is equal to 6900 newton. Going towards the next part. Part B. Describe the motion of the car between t is equal to 10 seconds and t is equal to 15 seconds. Explain how figure 1.1 shows this. So here we have to describe the motion of car between t is equal to 10 to 15 seconds. So first of all, we find where time t is equal to 10 and 15. So this is time 10 and it is 15. So here we have to describe its motion. So we can see that there is a curve that shows the speed time graph. So starting from this point and ending at this point, this curve we obtain. So this curve is actually showing that the speed of car increases. So first of all, the speed of car increases. Second thing is that its gradient decreases because the gradient from 0 to 10 seconds is larger as compared to the gradient from 10 to 15 seconds. So second point is that gradient decreases. And in this portion from 10 to 15 seconds, we can see that it's a curve. And here the speed increases, but it increases at the rate that is smaller as compared to 0 to 10. We can see here that from 0 to 10 seconds, the speed is also increases, but its rate is larger as compared to the increase in speed from 10 to 15 seconds. So I write here gradient decreases. Second is that speed increases. And acceleration is also decreasing. Acceleration is decreasing because the gradient decreases, and the gradient of speed time graph is actually the acceleration. Part C. Between t is equal to 10 seconds and t is equal to 15 seconds, the force exerted on the car due to the engine remains constant. So the force here remains constant. Suggest and explain why the car moves in the way shown in figure 1.1. So here we can see that the force due to the engine remains constant. And according to Newton's second law of motion, F is equal to ma. It means that acceleration is also equal to constant. And this acceleration is constant from t is equal to 10 to 15 seconds. So going back to the diagram again. Here we can see that from 10 to 15 seconds, that we already discussed, the slope is decreasing as the gradient is decreasing, so that the acceleration is also decreasing. In this region, the acceleration is decreasing. But in the last part, it is given that the acceleration is constant because force is constant. So how it is possible? So first of all, I consider that it's a car. And it is moving in this direction because the engine exerts a force. I write here the force of engine is equal to constant. As it moves, there is also a force that is due to the air resistance and it is acting in opposite direction. So there is also the air resistance force. And this force that is due to the air resistance, it is not constant. That's why acceleration is changing on the graph. So I write here that due to the air resistance, and the air resistance increases. So that acceleration does not remain constant. Question number 2, part A. State two properties of an object that may be changed by the action of forces. So here we have to describe the two properties that can be changed when we apply a force. So if I consider that I have a body and when I apply a force on it, if I consider that it's a body and I apply force on it, then its volume may change or its shape, size, and it may travel in any direction. So the direction of motion of this body also change by applying force. So I can write here that shape, and second one is size or volume. And also we can change the direction of motion. So I also write here direction of motion of body. Part B. A chest expander is a piece of equipment used by athletes in a gym. Figure 2.1 shows a chest expander that consists of 5 identical springs connected in parallel between two handles. So here is a figure 2.1 and we can see that there are 5 springs that are parallel to each other. Each spring has an unstretched length of 0.63 meter. So here is the original length, that is 0.63 meter. Two athletes are stretching the chest expander by pulling on the two handles in opposite direction. So these are the two handles and these two athletes expanding this by pulling them on opposite side. Part 1. The spring obeys Hooke's law. Explain what is meant by this statement. So here we have to explain what is Hooke's law. In Hooke's law, we write that the extension is directly proportional to applied force. I write here when we apply a force on body, there will be the extension, and this extension is directly proportional to the applied force. When we apply greater force, there will be the large extension, and when the amount of applied force is smaller, the extension will be small. So we write here that extension is directly proportional to the applied force. That is according to Hooke's law. Part 2. Each athlete pulls the handle towards himself with a force of 1300 Newton. Part 1. State the tension in each spring. So here we have to describe the amount of tension in each spring. So here there are total 5 springs and the force is given, that is 1300 Newton. So we have to calculate the force in each spring. Tension means it's a force. So I write here total net force is equal to 1300 Newton, and N is the total number of springs and it is 5 that are connected in parallel. Here we have to find out the tension in each spring. It means that we have to find the force on one spring. So I just write here that tension or force on one spring will be equal to 1300, that is force, divided by the total number of springs, that are 5. So the tension on each spring comes to be 260 Newton. So I write here tension is equal to 260 Newton. Part 2. The chest expander stretches and each spring is now 0.94 meter long. Calculate the spring constant K of each spring. Here we have to find out the value of K. So going back, here we write that the extension is directly proportional to applied force. So when I write, it will be F, that is the applied force, it will be equal to Kx, because we have eliminate this sign of proportionality, so there will be a constant, and K is a constant which is also be known as spring constant. So I write here F is equal to Kx. Here we have to find out the value of K. So K will be equal to F over X. And this value of spring constant we have to find for each spring. It means that we have to use the value of force on one spring, that is 260 Newton. So I write here 260 divided by X is total extension, and we can find out the total extension by subtracting the initial and final length. So first of all, initial, that is the original length, is 0.63, and when we extend springs, then the new extension is 0.95. So X will be equal to 0.94 minus 0.63. So I write here X is equal to 0.94 minus 0.63, and the K, that is spring constant, it comes to be 840, and the unit of K is, we know that the unit of force is Newton and X is meter. So K is equal to F over X. F will be in Newton and X in meter. So the unit of K is Newton per meter. I write here K is equal to 840 Newton per meter. Part 3. State the energy changes taking place as the two athletes use their muscles to stretch the chest expander. So which kind of energy changes take place here? So we know that inside the body of the athlete, energy is stored in the form of chemical energy, and when he stretches springs, then the chemical energy is converted into elastic energy, because the elastic energy is associated with the springs. So I write here energy changes from chemical to elastic energy. Question number 3. Figure 3.1 shows the shooting competition where air rifles fire soft metal pellets at distance targets. So here is the figure 3.1. When an air rifle is fired, it exerts an impulse of 0.019 Newton second on the pellet. Here the impulse is given, that is 0.019 Newton second. Part A. Defined impulse. Here we have to write the definition of impulse, And we know that impulse is the product of force and time, and it is also equal to change in momentum. I write here impulse, that is represented by I. It is the product of force and time, and this is also equal to change in momentum delta P. So I write here product of force and time is called impulse. Part B. The pellet has a mass of 1.1 into 10 की power minus 4 kg. Determine part 1. The speed with which the pellet leaves the rifle. Here we have to find out the value of speed when mass and impulse is given. So according to Newton's second law, that is F is equal to ma, and we know that acceleration is equal to change in speed per unit time. So I write here m Vf minus Vi over t. Vf minus Vi over t is actually equal to acceleration. So I write here F cross t is equal to m Vf minus mvi. So this F cross t, this product is basically equal to the impulse, and I write here I is equal to F cross t, and it is also equal to change in momentum. You can also see this relation from these equation. So I write here F cross t will be equal to mvf, because the initial velocity Vi is equal to 0. So here we have to find out the speed, that is Vf. So I write here Vf is equal to F cross t over m, and F cross t is actually impulse. I write here it with I and m as it is. So the value of impulse is given, that is 0.019. 0.019 divided by mass is 1.1 into 10 की power minus 4 kg. So the final velocity comes to be 170 meter per second. The unit of this speed is meter per second. So it will be 170 meter per second. Part 2. The kinetic energy of the pellet as it leaves the rifle. Here we have to find out the value of kinetic energy, and we know that kinetic energy is the energy that is possessed by a body due to its motion, and its formula is K dot E, that is kinetic energy. It is equal to half mv square, where m is the mass and v is speed. So I write here 1 over 2. Mass is 1.1 into 10 की power minus 4, and this speed we already calculate, it is 170 meter per second. So I write here 170 square. So that the kinetic energy comes to be 1.6 joule. I write here 1.6 joule. Next part, that is part C. The pellet melts when it strikes the target. Describe how the molecular structure of liquid metal differs from that of the solid matter. Here we have to differentiate between the liquid and solids. So, on the basis of their molecular structure. So, first of all, if you consider that it's a block, inside this there are liquid molecules. It is for liquid and it is solid. The liquid molecules have a distance between these, but the solid molecules are very close to each other. There is no distance between them. So these are arranged just like this. First point is that the molecules of solid metal have regular arrangement, but in a liquid this arrangement is regular. We can see here. So the molecules of solid metal have regular arrangement, but in liquid this arrangement is irregular. Second point is that the molecules of solid are closely packed. We can see from here that these are very close to each other as compared to liquid. So I write here molecules are closely packed. In solid, but further apart in liquid. And third point is that the molecules have a fixed position in solid but not in liquid, because the distance between the solid molecules are very small as compared to liquids, so the solid remains fixed on their position while the liquid molecules vibrate. So I write here molecules of solid have a fixed position but not in liquid. So these are the basic difference between the liquid and solid metals. Question number 4. Figure 4.1 shows a loudspeaker that is producing a sound wave in air of frequency 15,000 Hz. So there is a speaker in figure 4.1 that produces the sound waves and its frequency is 15,000 Hz. Part A. Describe how the cone of the loudspeaker produces this sound. So this is the cone of the speaker and it produces the sound. We have to describe that how the loudspeaker produces this sound. So first of all, in this figure we can see that these are two wires. This is first wire and this is second wire. And there is an alternating current passing through this wire. I write here AC current is passing through these wire and both of these are wires. So when the current changes, then there will be the vibration of the cone. The cone vibrate. When this cone vibrate, there will also the vibration of the neighboring particles, that is air particle present close to this, and these vibrate with the frequency that is equal to the frequency of vibration of cone. So the particles vibrate just like this. I write here, first of all there is AC current. When current changes, then cone vibrate, and due to the vibration of cone, the air particles also vibrate, and they vibrate at the frequency of vibration of cone. And this vibration will pass down to neighboring particles, so in this way the sound wave move. So I write here, AC in the wire, that is alternating current, cause the cone to vibrate. Neighboring air particles will also vibrate. Which produces compression and rarefaction because it's a sound wave and sound wave consists of compression and rarefaction. So first of all, in this figure we can see that there are air particles, and when these air particles are very close to each other, so there will be the compression. But when these particles are far away from each other, so it will be the rarefaction. In compression, the air molecules are very close to each other, while in the rarefaction, the molecules are further apart each other. So it is compression. And this is parallel to the energy transfer. And vibrating at 15,000 Hertz because it is the given frequency. So the particles vibrate at 15,000 Hertz. Part B. The speed of sound in air is 330 meter per second. Calculate the wavelength of this sound. Here we have to calculate the wavelength when the speed is given and also frequency is given, that is 15,000 Hertz. So using these two values, I write that V is equal to F lambda, that is the wave equation. Here V is speed, F is frequency and lambda is wavelength. We have to find out the value of lambda. It will be equal to V over F. So the speed is 330 meter per second and frequency is 15,000 Hertz. So the wavelength comes to be 0.022 meters. I write here 0.022 meter. So next part is part C. The loudspeaker is placed on considerable distance to the left of the barrier with a gap. So the loudspeaker is placed on the left side. The width of the gap is double the wavelength of sound. So this width, the distance between the barrier is actually width, and this gap width is double as compared to the wavelength of sound. If I suppose that this is A, that is the gap width, I write here gap width. If it is equal to A, then according to this statement that the width of gap is double as compared to wavelength, I can write A is equal to 2 lambda. It means that the wavelength will be half of this gap. Sound from the loudspeaker reaches the barrier and passing through the gap. Figure 4.2 shows the gap in the barrier. On figure 4.2, sketch a diagram that represents the sound wave as a series of wavefront. Part 1, traveling towards the barrier in the gap and traveling away from the barrier. So here we have to show the wavefront that is traveling toward the barrier. So first of all, it is given that the gap width is equal to double of the wavelength. So there will be the process of diffraction, that the bending involved here. So the diffraction take place here. And how much diffraction takes place, it depends upon the wavelength and the gap width. If gap width is equal to wavelength, then the diffraction will be maximum. But here the gap width is larger as compared to wavelength, so there will be less diffraction. Here gap width is greater than wavelength, that is 2 lambda, so less diffraction occur. And third case is that when the gap width is smaller than the wavelength, so there will be the maximum diffraction. So first of all, this distance is basically, that is the width of gap. It is 2 lambda. It means that when we have to draw the wavefront, their distance will be equal to half of this width of gap. So first of all, I measure this distance by using the ruler. And this distance is almost equal to 2 centimeter. It is the initial point and it is final point, and it is equal to 2 centimeter. Now the wavefront that I have to draw on the left side, the distance will be equal to 1 centimeter, that is also called wavelength. So first of all, I use ruler and measure this distance. So this is the first point, second and third. At that position, we have to draw the wavefront, and the distance between these wavefront will be equal to 1 centimeter, that is also equal to the wavelength. So when I draw these wavefronts, it is second, these are the 3 wavefronts that are approaching towards the barrier, and this distance, the distance between these 2 wavefronts will be equal to 1 centimeter, because the distance of this gap is equal to 2 centimeter, and according to this equation, the wavelength should be half. So when they passing through the barrier, they will be straight. So that I also draw the straight line here. And on the right side of this barrier, less diffraction occurred. Their bending will be very small, because here the gap width is greater than wavelength. Now the wavefronts are so these are the wavefronts when they passing through the barrier, and we have to know that this wavelength will be equal to 1 centimeter, because the distance between 2 wavefront is equal to wavelength, and in our case it is 1 centimeter. And we can see from here that there is no more diffraction, because there is very small diffraction. It is the reason that the gap width is greater than the wavelength. Question number 5. Figure 5.1 shows a sphere that is negatively charged. The sphere is attached to a plastic stand. So here is the figure 5.1, and we can see that it's a stand that is made up of plastic, and it's a sphere on which negative charges are distributed. Part A. Figure 5.1. Draw arrows to indicate the pattern and direction of electric field in the region surrounding the sphere. So in the figure 5.1 we can see that the sphere is negatively charged and we have to show the direction of electric field here. So first of all we know that if we consider that it's a positive charge, the electric field due to the positive charge points outward. Because the electric field lines emerge from the positive charge, so it will be outward in direction. But in our case the sphere is negatively charged, so let's consider it's a negative charge and now the electric field will be point in this direction. It will be towards the negative charge. So in figure 5.1 we can see that there are negative charge and we have to draw the electric field in this region. So by using the ruler I draw the lines that points towards the negative charge. So I am going to draw these. And all of these lines should be equidistant. The distance between them should be equal. Now I am going to draw the arrows. These are directed towards negative charge. So this is the pattern of electric field due to the negative charge sphere. Part B. A smaller uncharged metal sphere S. There is a sphere that is very small and it is neutral, means that it is not charged. It is suspended by a plastic thread and brought close to the negatively charged sphere. So first of all we have suspend it with the thread and this neutral sphere is brought close to the negatively charged sphere that is placed on the stand. Part 1. By drawing on figure 5.2 indicate the distribution of charges on S. So first of all we can see that there is a sphere S and it is uncharged. So uncharged meaning that this sphere has equal number of positive and negative charge that are randomly distributed inside this. So if I consider that there are 4 positive charge on this sphere S, so there will be 4 negative charge on it and all of these charges are randomly distributed inside this. So when this sphere is brought close to the negatively charged sphere, that is this, we can see that it is negative charge and we are bringing the sphere as close to the negatively charged sphere, means that if it is the positive charge, so there will be equal number of if it is negative charge, so there will be equal number of positive charge on the sphere. It will be on left hand side. If I consider that these are the 3 charge that is negatively charged, there will be equal number of positive charge on the sphere S. As a result, the negative charges appear on the other side of this sphere. So this is the distribution of the charge on sphere S when it is brought closer to the negatively charged sphere, because we know that the opposite charges attract each other and similar charges repel each other. Here it is negative and this is positive. It means that it is positive and negative. Both of these charges attract each other, due to which the sphere S moves towards the negatively charged sphere. Part 2. State what happens to S. So equal number of positive and negative charges appear on the S sphere when it is brought closer to the negatively charged sphere. So it moves towards the negative charge sphere. I write here. Part 3. An earth wire is then touched against S. Describe what happens in the violent state, how this affects the charge on S. So going back to the figure. Now this is our sphere S and we earth it. I suppose that I earth it. So what will happen on the charges on sphere X? The negative charges that is appear on the right hand side will move toward the ground while the positive charges remains on the sphere S. So when we earth the sphere S, there will be no charge that is negative on the sphere. The sphere is positively charged because we can understand in such a way that the sphere lost electron due to which all of the positive charge appear on the sphere. So I write here negative charges move towards earth. As a result, the sphere becomes positively charged. Next part C. The metal sphere S is an electrical conductor. The plastic thread is an electrical insulator. Explain these differences by referring to the structure of two materials. So we know that in the conductor there are free electrons and in the insulator there is no free electron. So there will be no conduction in insulator. I write here in metals many free electrons are available but in plastic electrons are fixed in position. So this is the main difference between the conductors and insulators. Question number 6. Figure 6.1 shows a shower that takes in cooled water. The water passes through an electric water heater and emerges from the shower head at a high temperature. The power of the heater is 900 watt. Part A. The shower is powered by a 230 volt electricity supply. Part 1. Calculate the current in the heater when it is switched on. So when we on the switch of heater, then there will be a current. So we have to find out the value of this current when the power and voltage is given. So we know the formula that power is the product of current and voltage, that is potential difference. Here we have to find out the value of current. I write in symbols form. It is I cross V. Here I have to find out the value of I. It will be equal to P divided by V. So power is given 9000 watt divided by potential difference is 230 volt. So that the current comes to be 39 ampere. So the value of current is 39 amperes. I write here. Part 2. Part 2. Suggest a suitable rating for the fuse in the heater circuit. Here we have to suggest that which fuse rating is suitable for heater circuit. So for the fuse rating, first of all we see the current that is passing through the heater, and it is 39 ampere that we already calculate. So the fuse rating must be greater than this value. If the fuse rating is less than this value, then the fuse will melt for no reason. That's why the fuse rating must be greater than this value, that is 39 ampere. So I write here fuse rating should be greater than 39 ampere, and I suppose that is 40 ampere. Part B. The specific heat capacity of water is 4200 joule per kg per degree C. The initial temperature of the cooled water is 16 degrees C. Determine the maximum mass of water that can be heated to a temperature 35 degrees C in 1 second. So here we have to find out the mass of water, and here specific heat capacity is given. So I use the formula that energy E is equal to product of mass, specific heat capacity and change in temperature. Here we have to find the value of maximum mass. So by separating mass, I get M will be equal to energy over specific heat capacity and change in temperature. So here we can see that C value is given, that is 4200 joule per kg per degree C, and change in temperature we can calculate it by final temperature minus initial temperature. Here the final temperature is 35 degrees C and initial is 16. So 35 minus 16 will be the change in temperature. Third one thing is energy. We don't know the value of energy. For that we use the formula of power, that power is equal to energy per unit time. So I write here power is equal to energy over time. From here we can calculate the value of energy, and by putting this equation we can easily calculate mass. So energy E will be equal to T, that is power cross time T. So the power is given in the first part, that you can see here it is 9000 watt. So I write here 9000 multiplied by time is given 1 second. So 1.0. So that the energy comes to be 9000 joule. Now I am putting this value of energy in equation 1. So that mass becomes as 9000 divided by specific heat capacity is 4200 multiplied by delta T, change in temperature, it will be 35 minus 16. So the value of mass comes to be 0.01 kilogram. So I write here mass is equal to 0.01 kilogram. Moving towards the next part of this question, that is part C. A safely control in a shower switches off the shower when the water becomes dangerously hot. The control uses a thermocouple thermometer to measure the temperature of the heated water. So which device are using here? Thermocouple thermometer. Part 1. Describe the structure of thermocouple thermometer. Include a diagram in your answer. Here we have to draw and explain what is thermocouple thermometer. So first of all, for drawing the diagram of thermocouple thermometer, we have to know about the component of it. So first of all, the thermocouple thermometer consists of voltmeter. Second thing, two metal wires, and there is also a junction. So I write here basic components are voltmeter, junction, and third one are metal wires. Now I am going to draw the structure of thermocouple thermometer. It's a voltmeter and there is a junction at this point. And I label it a junction. This is metal wire 1. And it is metal wire 2. And this is voltmeter. Now you also have to explain this in wording. So I write here the different metal wires joined at one end and fix the voltmeter between the free ends. Part 2. Suggest one reason why a thermocouple thermometer is suitable for this purpose. Because the thermocouple thermometer has small heat capacity and second it have quick response. So I write here because of its quick response, and second one is that it has small heat capacity. Question number 7. The resistance of a 1.0 meter length of a resistance wire is 7.6 ohms. So first of all, the resistance of this full scale is 1 meter and the resistance is 7.6 ohms. A length of this wire is taped to a meter rule. A crocodile clip is connected to one end of the resistance wire exactly at 0 meter mark of the rule. So we can see that it's a 0 mark of this rule and it's a crocodile clip that is attached at 0 meter. Figure 7.1 shows the crocodile clip connecting to point P. So this is connected at a point P. We can see in the figure 7.1. A second terminal Q is connected to a movable contact using a long length of connecting wire. So this is a point Q and it is connecting at this point. The movable contact is in contact with the resistance wire at a length L. It's a small l from the 0 meter mark on the rule. So the distance from this 0 meter to this point is basically small l. The movable contact is placed at different points on the resistance wire. The resistance R of the length small l of the wire is depend on small l. Part A. On figure 7.2, sketch a graph to show how the resistance R varies with small l length. For values of L between L is equal to 0 and L is equal to 1 meters. Mark appropriate values on the axis of the graph. So first of all, here we have to show the relation between R and L, where R is the resistance and L is the length. And we know that length is taken along x-axis and it's measured in meter, while the resistance is taken along y-axis and it is measured in ohms. We have to draw the graph between these for length 0 to 1 meter. So first of all, it is given that length is 1 meter and its resistance is 7.6 ohms. I write here, when length is equal to 1.0 meter, the resistance will be equal to 7.6 ohms. Second, when length is equal to 0, then the resistance will be equal to 0. So, the length varies from 0 to 1 meter while the resistance varies from 0 to 7.6. So first of all, we have to make a scale and mention different points on these axes. So I am going to use the ruler. So I am going to draw small points here. These all points are at equal distance. Now I am going to draw on the y-axis. So, if I consider that it is 0.1 meter, it is 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 8, and this is 1.0 meter. So here I consider that 0.1 meter is equal to 4 small bars. Are 4 readings on the scale. This is along x-axis. Second scale is along y-axis, that is for resistance. Here I suppose that 1 ohm resistance will be equal to 3 small bars. As we know that if it is 1 meter, so there will be equal number of equidistant 10 lines. Now I am considering that 4 lines is equal to 0.1 meter and 3 lines is equal to 1 ohm. So I write here it is 1, 2.0, 3.0, so first point is when L is equal to 0 and second R is also equal to 0. So 0, 0 is basically this point. I label here it is this point. Second point is that when length is equal to 1 meter, which is this point, and resistance is equal to 7.6. So it will be in between these. Now I am going to draw the lines. we see that at this point both of these intersect each other. So we have to join this point with this 0, 0. I write here it is 1 and 7.6, while this point is 0, 0. We have to join both of these points. So again by using ruler, so this is a graph between resistance and length. Now I am going to erase these lines. We can see that it's a straight line. Going towards the next part of this question. Part B. Figure 7.3 shows a battery of electromotive force, that is EMF 12 volt, connected across the 1.0 meter length of resistance wire. So here we can see that its EMF is 12 volt. Part 1. State what is meant by electromotive force. So here we have to define that what is electromotive force. So it is the energy transfer per unit charge, or we can define it as the energy transferred from chemical to electrical energy per unit charge. So I write here energy transferred from chemical energy to electrical energy per unit charge. Part 2. Calculate the current in the resistance wire. Here we have to find out the value of current. And we also know the value of resistance, that is 7.6 ohms, and the potential difference, that is EMF here. In this case, it is also given 12 volt. By using Ohm's law, we can easily find out the value of current. So I write here Ohm's law is V is equal to IR. So I will be equal to V over R. Here V, that is EMF, it is equal to 12 volt and resistance is 7.6 ohm. So that the value of current comes to be 1.6 ampere. I write here it is 1.6 ampere. Part 2. The potential difference, that is PD, between terminal P and the terminal Q when L is equal to 0.35 centimeter. So first of all, we can see here that the total length of this meter rule is 1. And this length is basically equal to 0.35 meter. And we have to find out the value of potential difference. We know that the EMF across the whole circuit is 12 volt. So I write here, when length is equal to 1 meter, then the value of potential difference is equal to 12 volt. It is given here that the EMF is 12 volt across 1 meter battery. Sorry, 1 meter length of the resistance wire. So when length is equal to 1 meter, the EMF will be equal to 12 volt. Second, here length is given 0.35 meter. But we don't know the value of voltage. We have to find out it. I suppose that it is equal to Y. Here we have to find out the value of Y. So we just cross multiply these. I write here 1 multiplied by Y will be equal to 12 multiplied by 0.35. So that Y will be equal to 12 multiplied by 0.35 and y comes to be 4.2. As it is a potential difference, so its unit will be volt. So I write here potential difference is equal to 4.2 volt. Part 3. The charges that passes through the resistance wire in 5.5 minutes. So here the value of time is given 5.5 minutes and we have to find out the value of charges that passes through the resistance. We know that current is the rate of flow of charges, where Q is charge, I is current. Here we have to find out the value of charge. It will be the product of current and time. So the current that we already calculate, it is 1.6 ampere. I write here 1.6 multiplied by time is given 5.5 minutes. So it will be 5.5. And we have to convert this time into seconds. That's why I multiply it with 60. So that the value of charge comes to be 520 coulombs. The unit of charge is coulomb. I write here charge is equal to 520 coulombs. Question number 8. Figure 8.1 shows a ray of red light incident on one side of the glass prism in air. Here is a figure 8.1 and we can see that it's a red light that is incident on the glass prism and passing through it. For red light, the refractive index of the glass is nr. Part A. The angle of incidence is 53 degrees and the angle of refraction in the glass is 30 degrees. Part 1. Calculate nr. Here we have to calculate the value of refractive index of glass. So I write here refractive index is the ratio of sine of angle of incidence to sine of angle of refraction. I write here n of r will be equal to sine of incidence angle over sine of refraction angle. So here angle of incidence is 53, sine of 53 degrees divided by the angle of refraction is 30. So I write sine of 30 degree. So that the refractive index of glass comes to be 1.6. I write here n of r is equal to 1.6. Part 2. On figure 8.1, sketch a line to indicate the path of the red light when it emerges from the glass prism. So here we have to draw the path of red light when it emerges out of this glass prism and we have to label it with R. So going back to the figure, we can see that it's a red light and it is incident at the prism at angle 53 degrees. So first of all, we know that the angle of incidence is the angle between normal line and the incident ray, while the angle of refraction is the angle between normal line and refracted ray. So here we have to draw the path of the ray when it emerges out of the prism. So first of all, we have to know that the ray is coming from denser to rare medium because glass has high density, so it is denser, and air, it has low density, so it is rare. And we can see that for the refracted ray, this ray comes from glass into air. That's why I am going to say that the ray of light coming from denser to rare medium. When the ray of light enters from denser to rare medium, then it will bend away from normal. And when this ray bend away from normal, so that the angle of refraction will be greater as compared to angle of incidence. Right here, angle of refraction should be greater than angle of incidence. Now I am going to draw the normal ray. First of all, that is normal to this side of prism. So this dotted line here is actually the normal line. No, this is the incident ray in this case, and it comes out of the glass into air. So the refracted ray will bend away from normal, so that the angle of refraction should be larger. This angle is basically the angle of incidence in this case. Now I am going to draw the refracted ray. It will bend away from normal such that the angle of refraction will be larger. So it will bend in this direction. So the direction will be just like this, and this angle is the angle of refraction, and we can see in figure 8.1 that the angle of refraction is larger as compared to angle of incidence. Part 3. Explain why the quantity refractive index does not have a unit. So refractive index does not have a unit because it is the ratio of same quantity. First of all, I write here refractive index is the ratio of speed. Here c is the speed of light in vacuum, while the v is the speed of light in any medium. So the refractive index is the ratio of speed of light in vacuum to the speed of light in any medium. And we know that the unit of speed is meter per second, and it is also meter per second. So both of these cancels each other. That's why the refractive index does not have any unit. So I write here, it is the ratio of two identical quantities. Part B. For violet light, the refractive index is NV if the glass is slightly larger than NR. Here it is given that the refractive index for violet light is greater than the refractive index for red light. Part 1. A ray of violet light is incident on the prism along the same path as that of the red light. On figure 8.1, sketch a line to indicate the path of the violet light in the prism and when it emerges into the air. Label this path with V. So going back to the diagram, here we have to draw the path for violet light. First of all, this ray is actually R. We have to label it with R. Second, we have to draw the same ray, but it is for violet light. So for the case of violet light, it is given that the refractive index of violet is greater than the refractive index of red light. We know that the red light and violet light red light has longer wavelength, while the violet light has shorter wavelength as compared to red. That's why the frequency of red light should be smaller and the frequency of violet light should be larger. So as the frequency of violet light is larger, so the speed here would be larger and the speed here would be smaller. In this case, there will be more bending for violet light. I write here more bending. Now going on a figure 8.1, we have to draw the path for violet light. Now I draw a ruler and draw the path inside this. For the violet light there will be more bending, that's why I am going to draw this line. First of all, I kept arrow here. It is coming from air to glass. Now for the refracted light, this ray comes from glass into air. So, first of all, I draw the normal at this surface and then we see the bending for this. The bending will be larger as compared to red light. That's why its path will be just like this. So in this way it comes out of the prism. Now I am going to erase these normal lines. So this is the path of both of these rays inside prism and outside prism, and we have to label it with, I think, V. So I write here V. That is for violet light. Next part 2. When the ray of white light is incident on the prism, dispersion produces a continuous spectrum of colored light. State how the speed of light in glass depends upon its frequency. Explain how this is shown by the dispersion of white light in the prism. So, first of all, its statement, and we also have to explain this. Going back, here we have to compare the red and violet light. The frequency for the violet light is larger. As a result, its frequency will be smaller. It means that it moves with smaller speed. So I write here, larger frequency result in smaller speed. And the explanation for is that violet light has more frequency, hence more refraction, where the red light has least. I write here, violet light has more frequency, hence more refraction, while red light has least. Question number 9, part A. The chemical symbol of the element lithium is Li. The proton number of the lithium is 3. Figure 9.1 is a representation of a nucleus of radioactive isotope of lithium that is about to decay. So here is a figure 9.1 and we can see that it's the nucleus of helium. In the statement it is given that lithium has 3 protons. So these actually are the protons. There are 3 protons. I write here 3. 1, 2 and 3. And second, there are total 5 neutrons. Now I am going to shade it this. So these are the neutrons. And the total neutrons are 5. I write here proton is equal to 3 and neutrons are 5. Part 1. Write down using the nuclide notation the symbol that represents this isotope of lithium. So the symbol of lithium is Li, and when we write at this position we write the atomic number, while at this position we write the atomic mass. So here we have to know about the atomic mass and atomic number. So number of proton is basically equal to atomic number. I write here atomic number is equal to number of protons. In our case, number of proton is equal to 3. So I write here 3, and at this position we have to write the mass number. And mass number is the sum of number of protons plus number of neutrons. I write here P plus N. I write here P plus N. P is, that is number of proton 3 and number of neutrons are 5. So there will be total 8. So mass number will be 8. So I write here it is lithium with atomic number 3 and mass number 8. Part 2. The isotope of lithium decays by beta particles emission to form another nucleus. Complete figure 9.2 to represent this decay by. Using the same representation as in figure 9.1 and in the space after the arrow, draw a diagram of the nucleus formed by the decay. Second point is that writing the name of the particle that is identical to beta particle on the answer line provided. So here we have to write the name of particle that is very identical to the beta particle. So first of all, when an element undergoes beta decay, then its atomic number increases by 1, but its mass number remains same. So first of all, if I consider that it's a element with atomic number A and mass number with atomic numbers Z and mass number A. I write it again. I consider it's a element with atomic number Z and mass number A. It decays into beta particle. So I write here it's a beta with -1 and 0 plus it changes into another element with atomic number Z plus 1 while the mass number remains unchanged. So now we will guess that beta particles is just like electron because of their charge -1. So the name of the particle that is very identical to beta particle is actually electrons. That's why I write here electron. Secondly, we have to decay this element by beta emission and then it changes into another element. We also have to draw the structure of another element. Here we can count that the total number of protons are 3 while the total number of neutrons are 5. So as the beta particle is actually electron and on the left hand side we can see that there is no electron. So how it is possible that this element decays by beta emission and gives out electron? So if I consider that it's a neutron, it changes into proton and also gives electron. In this way the electrons are emitted by this particle. This electron I write here and this proton is extra. This will be appear on the right hand side of this arrow. Now I am going to draw. First of all, there are 3 protons. It is 1, 2 and 3. Now this proton is extra, so that there is 4 protons, and the symbol for proton is just like this. Before decay, there are total number of 5 neutrons, but one of them neutron decays and it changes into proton and electron. So there will be total number of neutron equal to 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 actually the number of neutrons. Part B. A radiation detector is set up in a laboratory where there are no radioactive samples. On 6 separate occasions, the detector is switched on for 1.0 minute and the background count is recorded. The count rates are 23, 27, 25, 24, 20 and 25. Part 1. State why the readings are not all identical. So all of these counts are not identical. These are not same. We have to explain reason why it is so. So because we know that we cannot predict that when an element decay. So the radiation is random. That's why the counts are different. I write here, radiation is random. Part 2. Suggest a possible source for this background radiation. So background radiations are actually the radiation that is present in our atmosphere, and the sources of these radiations are rocks, buildings. I write here rocks, buildings. Next part 3. A sample containing only one radioactive isotope is brought into the laboratory. The half-life of the isotope is 15 hours. The sample is placed near to the radiation detector in this laboratory. The detector is switched on and after 1.0 minutes the count of 440 is recorded. A sample is left next to the detector and the experiment is repeated 45 hours later. The detector is switched on for 1 minute. Predict the reading for the count obtained on this occasion. So first of all, there are total 440 counts, and this count rate is due to the background radiation and actual counts. So first of all, I find out the actual count, and that is due to the background radiation. So from this part, these are the counts that is due to the background radiation, and I am going to find out the average of these number to find out the average count rate. So I just add all of these number, 23 plus 27 plus 25 plus 24 plus 20 plus 25 and divide this by the total, that is 6, because 6 are the total number of counts, so that the count due to the background radiation comes to be 24. I write here these are equal to 24. So going next, first of all I write here after 1 minute the count rate is 440. So after 1 minute it is equal to 440. And when we have to find out the actual count rate, we also have to know about the background radiation count rate. So I just write here average background radiation For these the total count are 24. So that the actual reading of counts comes to be 440 minus 24, it will be equal to 416. Next we have to find out the total half-life. For that there are 45 hours and the half-life of this isotope is 15. So when we have to find out the total half-life, I write here total half-life, it will be equal to these 45 hours divided by the half-life, that is 15. It is 3, so that there are total 3 number of half-lives. No, there are 416 counts and total number of half-lives are 3. Now I write here when first half-life pass, then the count will be 416 divided by 2. It comes to be 208. Because half-life is the time during which half of the element decays. That's why I divide 416 by 2 so that I get 208. After second half-life, I divide 208 by 2 so that it comes to be 104. And after third half-life, it will be equal to 104 divided by 2 and it is equal to 52. So these are the count from sample. No, the background count are 24. So the total count will be equal to this count of the given sample, that is 52, plus the background count, that is 24. So that the total count comes to be 76. So I write here reading is equal to 76 count.